be here with part 3 of Beginning Illustrator. Excited to show you the newer features of Illustrator for the iPad. In the first couple series, we've showed you just some of the basic stuff with what Illustrator for the iPad can do for you, and we're going to jump into a little bit more of color and also the really cool repeat feature here. So let's jump right in. So I have a fire hydrant and a leaf that I have created on the iPad, and what I'm going to do is call out my properties panel, and I'm going to select my fire hydrant with my selection tool. And into the appearance section, I can go into the fill section, which is where I can go ahead and pick and choose my colors. Now, I've already created this fire hydrant, and if I'd like to select one of the shapes and add this color to my swatch panel for further use, I can select the shape with my selection tool, click on the fill in the appearance section, go to my swatches section, and simply hit my plus. That's going to add my swatch to my object, or to my swatches panel. And I can do this with any of my shapes repeatedly, just going in, clicking the plus. And you'll notice when we add a color to the swatches panel, it will have that little corner on it, which means that's a global color. And a global color means if we edit that color in the swatch panel, it's going to change it everywhere that it's used in my creation. But we can go beyond just basic color. I'm going to select this fire hydrant, and I'm going to use the duplicate function at the bottom of my control bar here. I'm going to use my 2 fingers and slide my artboard over, and then drag my duplicate section over. I'm going to go back into my appearance section, and I'm going to click on my fill. But now I'm going to switch over to the gradient section here. In the gradient section, I can add a gradient, so I can have a linear gradient or a radial gradient. I'm going to choose a linear gradient, and this is going to take my creation and apply a nice gradient to each and every shape here. Now this is pretty cool because now I've gone from what was kind of a flat looking illustration to a very dynamic one. And I'm going to zoom in by using my 2 fingers, and like I would do the pinch and just expand. Then I can use my 2 fingers to move my artboard around. And now I can jump in and I can select one of these shapes. Going back to my fill section, this is where I can go into the gradient. And now if I'd like to change the colors in the gradient, I simply click on one of the color stops on either end, and I can then go in and I can change my hue and my saturation of that color on that gradient stop. Clicking on the other gradient stop, I can then apply a color to that area as well, and dynamically change the look and feel of my creation. Now, if I would like to go in and I would like to do another shape, I can select another shape, go back to the fill portion, but then how do I get the same color? So I'm going to click on the color stop here, I'm going to jump over to my eyedropper tool, and it's going to give me my little sampling ring. I'm then going to drag that sampling ring, and it actually gives me a super hyper-focused enlargement of my creation, so I can then just drag that over and say, I'd like to sample that color right there. So I can pick up existing colors from my creation very easily using this eyedropper tool. Now, unlike other eyedropper tools, you don't just simply click in the location, you grab your little sampling ring. It gives you a little magnifier so you can select that point or that area perfectly to match that color. And as you go on, you can very quickly go in and grab those colors using your eyedropper tool, grab your sampling ring, so you can always get the same colors from your creation applied to other areas. Now, if you'd like to capture that gradation, you can just simply select that object that you have for the gradation, hit the plus in your swatches panel, and it will add that gradation to your swatch panel as well. So a couple cool things that you can do with colors here, which I really enjoy. I'm going to zoom back out by using my pinch feature and then use my 2 fingers to go ahead and slide. And I'm going to come back to my original illustration of my fire hydrant. Now what I'd like to do here is kind of like this cool slip shadow effect where half of it's dark and half of it's going to be light. I'm going to duplicate this shape so I can show you how this is going to work. So with the shape duplicated, I'm going to come over here with this duplicate shape. I'm going to move it down into our free space here. And I'm going to then go ahead and I'm going to do what is called a clipping mask, which is what I'd like to put a different color inside this shape, but only half the shape. And I don't want to go through the whole point of cutting this shape in half. I just would like to put this really cool slip shadow. So I'm going to go to my toolbar and I'm going to draw a rectangle over my shape. I'm going to go to my fill section and I'm going to fill this with black. Now, I don't want the black to be solid black. I would just like it to be a darker black, but also be translucent. So going back into my fill here, into my properties, I'm going to set the opacity down to, say, 65%. But I'm also going to set my blending mode to multiply. And multiply is going to make it look like we truly have a shadow on our object. If we don't choose multiply, you'll see that it kind of sits over the top of this, kind of like as a gray fog, and it kind of mutes the color down below. When I set my blending mode to multiply, that's going to make it look like the shadow is actually part of the color. So I've set my opacity to 65% and my blend mode to multiply. And I'm going to select both of these shapes, and I'm going to retract my properties panel, and I'm going to come back over here to my object, and I'm going to say make clipping mask. Now when I make a clipping mask, one of the things that we have to do with a clipping mask is our object that we're going to go ahead and put this shadow into has to be on the front, which means when you're framing a piece of artwork, you don't put the artwork in from the back or the front, you put it in from the back. So your frame is in the front and your artwork goes in from the back. So I'm going to select my frame, my shape that this shadow is going to go in, and I'm going to call up my layer order right here. And if I click on my order, I can then bring my frame to the front, select both of these shapes, go to my object panel, and I'm going to say make clipping mask. And what this does is this captures my shadow inside that shape without me having to redraw that shadow. Now when I move that shadow up back to my object here, I can move that back in there, and I got that really cool slip shadow. Now if that's a little bit too dark, not a problem. I can go back here and I can set the opacity of that shadow just by going back into my properties panel and setting the opacity here and getting that and making sure that I register it perfectly in line there so that I get this really cool slip shadow. And we have to zoom in a little bit to get this to fit right where it should. There we go. Really cool way to make a slip shadow. I'm going to jump over here to my leaf, because what I'd like to do with my leaf here is I want to show you another cool gradient feature. And this has always been one that has fascinated me ever since they added it to this. Going over to my properties panel, clicking on the fill, I'm going to switch from solid color to gradient, and then my freeform gradient is going to show up. With the freeform gradient, this allows me to add color spots on my object, and those color dots can go ahead and be any color that I'd like. So I can create highlights and shadows in different colors that are going to blend very nicely. I can control the radius of that color by grabbing the lower circle on that dotted radius and moving this all around. And I can simply add another color by clicking anywhere on the leaf. And have a little bit of fun. Maybe you want a little bit of different color on your leaf here. And so we're just going to run around here, and maybe we got some blues and greens to kind of create this cool leaf effect. And maybe you want some white to add a little bit of white to that, or just a little bit of color so we can tint that to kind of create a cool looking leaf. So it can be done very easily using the gradient here, but this is the freeform gradient. I absolutely love this. Now, one last feature that is going to be unique to the iPad when everything releases is this wonderful feature. And this one is phenomenal. If you've ever tried to go ahead and create an entire duplication of a shape, so say I want to do like a flower with these petals and I'd like to rotate them around and duplicate them, we do have this wonderful repeat. Now again, this is only for the iPad on this initial release. When I click on the repeat, I can click on the radial repeat and it will automatically repeat via a radius. On the right-hand side, I have my up arrow that I can move up or down to control the amount of the repeat here. And then I can resize this object by grabbing any one of the pull handles. And my little clamshells in the middle here will allow me to control how many items get repeated. And this is so totally cool. Now I do this and I can scale it up and down and do that. But you know what? You can also repeat repeated items. So if I take this item that I've created and click on the repeat again, I can do a radial repeat and repeat that whole thing over again. Pretty cool stuff. And remember, this repeat feature is only here on the iPad on the initial launch, and then you're going to see it on the desktop launch later. So that takes care of the iPad portion. So join me for the desktop portion, and I'm going to show you some more of the new features in the desktop version. Here we are, folks, with part 3 of Intro to Illustrator, and this is going to be the desktop version and some of the newer features that have been built into Illustrator 2021. So I've got my fire hydrant, and the client has asked me to go ahead and get some color variations of this fire hydrant rather than the red. So I just want to show you some dynamic ways that we can go ahead and change these colors and add some gradients and do some interesting effects as well. So I'm going to select my fire hydrant and I'm going to duplicate it using my Option or Alt, click and drag, so I can keep my original and I can edit this particular version. Now, instead of going into my swatch panel and selecting each portion here and selecting a different color, what I want to do is I want to call up my Adobe Color Themes panel. So I'm going to go under Window, and I'm going to go under Color Themes, and it opens up my Color Themes panel. Now, it may come up under the Create tab where you see this window and you see the entire color wheel and spectrum. I'm going to click on the Explore tab. And with this Explore tab, we're going to go in and you can search by keywords or you can see user-generated color themes. Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to just take a couple of these color themes, put them into my swatch panel, and just very quickly and easily apply them to my fire hydrant. So this set of colors could be really cool. I'm going to click on the 3 dots. I'm going to add this to my swatches panel, and that goes in. And I'm going to try a couple different ones too. I'm going to scroll down. Let's do some different ones. Okay, this could be kind of interesting as well. And I'm going to add that to my swatches too. Now, in order to do this, I'm going to select my entire fire hydrant, and I'm going to go under my Edit menu, under Edit Colors, and choose Recolor Artwork. Now, one of the new things with the Recolor Artwork is this new front-facing panel. So this is new. Recolor Artwork has been around, but this particular panel is new. And what's cool about this is if you'd like to very quickly just simply change the colors without adding any different colors to your swatches, you can select your entire object, use your global color edits here, and you can just run the paddles right around here to just simply change the entire range of the colors on your object. Okay, you can also click reset, get it right back to where it is. Super easy. Well, let's click on the advanced options here. And on the advanced options, what I want to do is I'd like to go ahead and apply the colors that I have just downloaded from my Color Themes panel and added to my swatch panel, and they sit right here. If I click on these, you can see that I can dynamically add those colors, and it automatically adds those colors to my objects. And what's interesting with this is I don't have to go in and pick and choose. Now, what I can do is I can then go in and use my little buttons down here to just randomly change the color orders here. Okay, so this is still the same set of colors, but I can randomly change them to get very different dynamic creations here without me having to pick this all apart and do this. So I love this feature. Super cool, and you can just create some really dynamic and really crazy cool stuff with it. So that's some of the new features right there. Now, adding a gradient to your object too can be a lot of fun. I'm going to select my duplicated object here, and in my swatches panel, I have an existing white to black gradient. When I select this and I fill this with the gradient, all of my shapes get filled with that gradient right there. And this produces a very cool effect of highlights and shadows and kind of gives it depth and dimension. If I'd like to edit my gradients, I'm going to select one of the shapes with my selection tool. I can go into my properties panel, and my fill button will go ahead and allow me to select that fill, and then from that flyout menu, I can click on the gradient options. When the gradient options come up, I click on the Edit Gradient button inside my gradient panel. And by the way, you can get your gradient panel by going under Window and calling up Gradient here as well. When I get my gradient panel up and I click on the Edit Gradient button, I get my gradient annotator. To change the colors in the gradient, simply click on either one of the color stops here and double click. You will be able to mix your own color using sliders, choose from an existing swatches that you had here, including ones that you had in your Adobe color themes. Or you can also use your eyedropper tool to go ahead and sample an existing color on your artwork. Go to your other color stop, double click on that. I'm going to call up one of my swatch colors here, and I'm going to add that swatch to it. Now I can use my diamond in the middle to control how fast or how slow that gradient is going to blend into the other colors. Go back to my selection tool, and there is my gradient. Now, I'd like to add this gradient to other portions of my object. So I've selected my object. I'm going to go to my swatches panel. At the bottom of my swatches panel, I'm going to click the plus, which is going to allow me to capture this as a new gradient swatch. So I'm going to call this red to orange and click OK. And that's going to plunk that right into my swatches panel. And now I can simply select that swatch and I can add those to all of my other objects. Now at any point I can go into my gradient panel and I can edit that, and I can change how fast or how slow that gradient blends, as well as going in and maybe just going in and darkening up a little bit of those reds right there to create a little bit more of a dynamic interest right there. So interesting things that we can do with our gradient here and have a lot of fun with that as well. But you know what really makes it cool for the gradient here is the freeform gradient. Now the freeform gradient, I love this. Now we have our linear gradient, we have our radial gradient, and we also have our freeform gradient. And our freeform gradient allows us to add points to this, just like I showed you on the iPad here. And again, click on any one of the color stops here and double click to change that color, either from your existing swatch panel or your color mixer, whatever that may be. And I'm going to add some cool colors to this as well. To delete a color, simply click on it, hit your delete, and it goes away. To add a color, simply click on it, and you can change how that color influences the other colors by dragging a little button on there for the radius. Edit any of the existing colors simply by double-clicking, creating a darker or lighter version of that, and you get a whole dynamic range of colors. Add as many of these as you want to with it. In your gradient panel, one of the interesting things that you can do too is you can have these land as points, but you can also connect them as lines. And if I connect these as lines, I simply click on the first one, the second to the third. And what this does is this creates a little bit smoother blending. So just think of this as if you're kind of like running your finger through paint and the paint is kind of following your finger. This is kind of what the lines do. And yes, you can add other colors too on there as well to create a very dynamic look and feel to this as well. And if you double click here, you can also control the opacity on those colors too, so you don't have to use the full strength opacity on that, which is a really nice feature. So I love the gradient features here, especially the freeform gradient. And go back to my selection tool. Now, dynamic type is one of those things that is going to be something that you're probably going to want to work with as well. So what I have here is I have some type that I typed out here. If I go to my properties panel, I can see what kind of type that is. And the character here is called Fat Frank Heavy. And what a name for a typeface. And this is part of the entire Adobe Creative Suite of fonts that you have access to. And if you do want to get access to all those fonts, you go to your font menu in your properties panel, click on Find More, and this is going to initialize the Adobe font menu, and you can activate your Adobe fonts instantaneously directly from Illustrator or InDesign or Photoshop or whatever application that you're using. So this one happens to be Fat Frank Heavy, which crazy cool name. Now what I want to do is I want to go and I want to apply some really interesting effects with this using the Appearance panel. So I need to outline my type. So I'm going to go into the Type menu and choose Create Outlines. And I also need to ungroup my type as well. So I'm going to go under Object and choose Ungroup. Now I'm going to close my gradient panel. I'm going to call up my appearance panel, and I'd like to show you some really cool things that we can do with the appearance panel that'll blow you away with type. And I love showing this because this is one of these things that's so simple and easy, but a lot of people don't know you can make it this simple. So let's get started. In my appearance panel, I can control the fill and the stroke. I'm going to click on the fill, click on the drop down, and I'm going to fill my type with orange. I'm going to click on my stroke, and I'm going to put a brown stroke around this, and I'm going to beef up the stroke a little bit. On the stroke link, I'm going to set my stroke to the outside, okay, so the stroke doesn't fill in the middle. And it's like, okay, this is nothing special or fantastic. But here's one thing that I want to do. I'm going to go down to the bottom of my appearance panel, and I'm going to add a new stroke to this. I add a new stroke, and basically what this allows me to do is it allows me to stack strokes or fills on top of each other. Now, very much like the layers panel, this stroke is on top, this stroke is on the bottom. I'm going to create a lighter stroke behind here, and I'm going to beef that up, and you can see that that stroke will then appear behind my other stroke. And it's like, okay, that's incredible, isn't it? It is. So I can create something like that and do this really cool stroke. And this is all one object that I've just gone in and I've created this extra stroke on right here. But, you know, this may not look good because it kind of overlaps a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and take this one step further just to blow your mind. With this stroke active here, you can turn on and turn off. I'm going to take this stroke and I'm going to go under my Effects menu, Distort and Transform, and Transform. And I am going to move this stroke just a little bit. I'm going to do like 0.1 millimeter down and 0.1 millimeter over. And I've got my preview turned on here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set the number of copies here, and I'm going to keep duplicating this numerous times to create this incredibly cool drop shadow or slip shadow effect. And it's like, what? I know. Is that not cool? And it's like, okay, this is just absolutely crazy. Okay? Now, remember, I'm not doing anything. I'm not creating multiple copies of the word or anything. What I'm doing is I'm actually creating multiple copies of this stroke all on this object. Well, if I can create multiple strokes, I can also create multiple fills. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to add a new fill to this. And with this fill on top, so this fill is going to be orange. If I fill this with a different color, you're going to see a different color on top of this. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in on the effect here, and I'm going to try this really cool one called Stylize and Scribble. And I'm going to do a scribble in here, and I'm going to do a cool scribble. We're not going to see anything yet because I haven't changed the color. So I'm going to choose kind of like a sketch scribble and click OK, not seeing anything. But now I'm going to change this color ever so slightly to a different color so we can kind of get that color on there. So check that out. I can add different colors to that scribble right there to really make this dynamic. Isn't that amazing? And this is all to do with the appearance panel. This is what's absolutely incredible with this. I just absolutely love it. Now remember, each one of these letters is totally movable and editable by itself. So if you'd like to space these things out a little bit more so those strokes don't touch each other, you certainly can. And with that, you've got that so that you can space those out. Edit any of these right here in the appearance panel quickly and easily by just going in, selecting the letter or all the letters. Let me space these all out here so they look cool, select them all, and I can easily change the fill, the stroke, the color of that stroke, and make it look more dynamic, anything. Now, that was the appearance panel. Now you're ready to go ahead and you're ready to take your content and be able to go ahead and export it or get it ready to put into a library so you can use it in other places. Let's go into the window menu. We're going to call up libraries, and our libraries come up here. And if I'd like to put something into a library, what I can do is I can create a new library by going in and just simply clicking on my little cheese grater and say create a new library, which I did for Adobe Max. And if I'd like to use any of this content in Photoshop or InDesign or Illustrator or Premiere or any other Adobe application, I can simply drag that into my library and it puts it right in there with all my content, and I can call up that library anyplace else in other Adobe applications. Fantastic. Okay? This is incredible. Now, what happens if I'd like to go in and I'd like to grab these colors rather than the graphic? Not a problem. I'm going to select my fire hydrant, go to the plus down here, and I can actually grab that graphic. But if I select that shape, I can now go ahead and I can add that fill color to that so I can use that color in other places. If I go in and I do that gradient, I can grab that graphic and put it in there just by dragging it in. If I want just that shape, I can drag it right in there as well. Expand that so we can see. And grab whatever graphic, whatever artwork, whatever content right there. So it makes it super awesome. Then you can just grab and go. If you do want to export your assets here, so you're doing something for the web or you're building something, it's very easy to go in and go ahead and export your contents. And we have different versions here where we can do PNGs and JPEGs and scalable vector graphics and PDFs. When you're going ahead and dragging content in, if you drag a single object in, you can drag it in here and your assets are there. And then you can export it in different formats here at different sizes of your original. If you have multiple objects here and you drag them into your asset export right here, if you drag them in ungrouped, they will all come in as separate objects, okay? But if you do go in, I hit delete a little bit too soon here, I can select those objects and use my trash can, get rid of those. But if I drag these all in by holding down my Option or my Alt key, it's going to add it all as one grouped object. And then you can simply take these objects, export them any size, any flavor, any format that you want. What's nice about this is that if you do go in and you change any of your assets in here, and you want to edit any of your assets while you're going in and working with these things, maybe I go in and I'd like to change the fill color of this. Any changes that you make, you're going to notice that it's going to dynamically change in your asset export panel too, so there's no need to update that as well. Now, when it comes to saving your files, when you go under Save As, you can go ahead and save your files. You can save them to your desktop, to your computer, or save them to the cloud. When you save them to the cloud, this makes it available for you wherever you use Illustrator, on your iPad, on your desktop, on your laptop, and you can save it so that you have access to these everywhere. Makes it super helpful. And there it is, folks. Hopefully this will go ahead and spurn some more creativity. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being part of Adobe Max. It always makes it great that we can show these really cool features and show off everything that Adobe has done to make our life and creativity that much better. Thanks, everybody.